Alright, so it's been a month, and this time for this Kobeni, we're gonna use Clip Studio 5 since it's the 5th month now, a month ago. I know my two previous videos already covered a lot, and it probably feels like I'm making the same stuff with different Kobeni in it, but I assure you, this one is different. First, I'm using a different program, Clip Studio Paint, which was updated just a month ago, or 3 months maybe, depends on when I upload this. Second, I kinda draw this differently too. This time, I start the shading directly with a normal layers, not using the multiply or overlay layers right away. It doesn't sound like much, but that's like a completely different process. I still haven't buy Clip Studio Paint yet. Luckily, it still allow me to use it with limited features, unless you use the secret Chinese version that require password on its launch. The last time I used Clip Studio was on version 2.0. As someone who only draw with basic features, I don't see much difference between these updates, so I don't think I'm gonna cover the update itself and just use this normally. Starting with the sketch. There is nothing interesting to explain on about sketching. It's just as simple as you can see here, it's all muscle memory mostly. I don't really get why a lot of people prefer to watch this early part, like the sketching and the base coloring. Personally, I think the rendering is fun, the most fun part. The sketching and base colors are just setup and can be boring to be studied, and everyone gonna have different process on this early stage. Basically, just take your time on this early sketch since everything else will follow these shapes. If you mess up this early part, you will gonna have problem to fix the base itself, which gonna take a lot of time. The only thing I can say is, if you want a semi-realistic style like this, try using more curve instead of perfectly straight lines. I will start with simple lines for the head shape like this. And then I can just use liquify to make it curvier and more natural. Because making straight lines is easier to replicate, so you can get more consistent result for the base sketch. Then you can add the curve, because the curve lines on the face is always different most time. Even on like different angle and different expression will always looks different. But it won't be a big problem if your base shapes is already correct. And don't worry too much about making mistakes. For example, if you look closely here, the eyes are slightly off. And that's completely normal. You don't need to focus too much on it if you are just casual drawing. You can either fix it with liquify or redraw it later, or just keep it there, because most people won't really notice some small mistakes like that. And then most time you won't even notice the mistake you made because your brain will get used from looking at making your mistakes look normal for you. That's why it's a good idea to take a short break once in a while, or simply flip your canvas when you want to check it, since our brain register it as something new, so you can see the mistakes freshly. It still has its own limit actually, but better than zero, I guess. Then I don't even remember which brushes I'm using here, and I probably rename most of them anyway. Honestly, they are not that special. They're all pretty similar to the default brushes. You can do surprising amount with just the basic ones, but I will aware that most brushes can give you some kind of confidence from using it. So just try a lot of brushes and see which works best for you. For me, simple brush works the best for this early sketching part. I only use the textured one on the last part only. I will try to link all the brush I use here if I can. The way I make the sketch is pretty chill, I guess. I don't use those super confident one strokes line like a lot of pro artists do. I build everything up with multiple short strokes instead, not that tiny chicken scratches. It's just short, controlled line, still a bit confident, I guess. The only downside is this look less cool than making it with long confident lines always make you look like a pro. But just do things based on what makes you comfortable. If this works, I see no reason for changing it. And sometimes you know exactly what's wrong, but your hand just refuses to draw what your brain imagining. It's like skill issue or something. Like the hands I try to make here, I wanted to add them to like frame the conversation, like covering to the camera forward, but I just couldn't make them work properly. My skill wasn't quite there yet, but nothing wrong to try it, I guess. To be honest, I think the sketch on the right looks still a bit better. I don't even know why I ended up finishing this one instead. I was probably just too lazy to draw the body, so I just went to the head-only sketch on this one. Once I'm happy with the sketch, I tint the sketch into red color. You can do this by pressing Ctrl M to open the tone curve or by going to filter tone curve. Then switch the channel from RGB to red and raise the bottom left point to around 25%. That's usually enough to change the color. If you never used tone curve before, it's actually pretty simple. The graph controls the brightness mostly. The left side represents the darker values and the right side represents the brighter ones. So the bottom one is darker and the top is lighter. So if you raise the bottom left point, the darkest, the pure black colors become lighter. While if you lower the top right point, that will make the pure white into darker. You can also add as many control points as you want to fine-tune the curve itself. You can also switch between the red, green, and blue channels to shift the colors, like what I did here when I changed the channel to red and increase the black point into those red color. I wouldn't worry too much about the theory, just play around with it and you will quickly get a feeling for what it actually do. The idea of this red sketch is to make it blend with the skin color later. Since we're gonna set the layer into multiply mode, having it black color gonna make things look muddy. With red, it will mix with the skin orange color and it will actually looks like a fresh shading, turning it into dark red color. So this works best for normal skin color, or if you want makes everything feel warmer. After that, I create a new layer underneath the sketch for the base colors. I usually use lasso tool for blocking everything in. By holding shift to keep adding the selection and holding alt if you want to subtract parts from it. I prefer to use lasso compared to by using brush or bucket because I think lasso is more controlled and solid. Like sometimes I don't really want to follow the sketch itself, I just make it myself with the lasso. What's important here is focusing on the silhouette. You don't want to make it blurry or make the shapes not recognizable. If you make it blurry, it will looks like less focused and not finished and maybe a bit vague. For the base color, I almost always pick something around this area on the color wheel picker here, around a quarter from the top. You can use any color you like, but staying around these middle values give you enough room to add both brighter highlights and darker shadows later. It's a safe starting point because you can easily brighten or darken it later without losing any qualities. By using this middle part, you can push in more proper highlights later, making it more pop and visible. If you are making it too bright from the start, the white color gonna looks weak compared to the others. So you cannot make a proper lighting with it. You only can focus on the shadows. While we probably mostly gonna need both shadow and lighting. I also like working by using darker background. If the canvas is using pure white color, the color you use, the color you pick, gonna looks darker than they actually are. Because we see colors relative around its surrounding, which make it harder for you to judge the value itself. So that's why most artists really like to use this light gray background because it's more neutral and allow you to choose color properly. Once the base colors are filled in, I clip the sketch layer on the top and clean up the edges using hard brush, especially around the hair. So we can always modify this base layer for making it better silhouette and stuff. Next, I duplicate the sketch layer and set it to color burn and apply slight blur. This creates some really soft shading around the edges and helps everything blend together a little better. This one trick is something I always do since I learned it from the OG artist Ilya Kusinov. So the layer is set on the top above the sketch layer, so it's gonna affect all other layers you're gonna add later. So it's like an auto shading cheat or something. Especially since most of time there are shadows around the lines we made, because lens is made from two different objects overlapping, right? And the shadows gonna add more depth to it or something. It just looks better. You can try it yourself. So you set it color burn, blur it a bit, and maybe reduce the opacity if it's too much, the opacity of the layer itself. And then I magically add other parts too. It's on different layer. I think I forgot to record this, but actually it's nothing fancy. It's just one layer for the hair and another for the clothes. Just the same thing like before. This time I start using actual shading directly on normal layer. So I make new layer above the skin base layer and begin painting the shadows directly. Choosing the shadow color is pretty simple. So first I color pick the skin color I have here, and then I shift the hue slightly toward red, just tiny bit. And then move down to the darker value. This is what most people like to do, especially on the skin. So we start with this orange yellow and with more red color. But there is no exact rules here, so don't worry too much about picking the correct color. You even don't really need to change the hue that much. As long as it looks good, then it's good. After that, while keeping roughly the same value, I shift the color on this color wheel toward right side to give some kind of bounce like on this right side. So it's like the same color but more saturated for some kind of bounce like. You're gonna have same value using this triangle color wheel as long as you stay on the same level on that color wheel. This is why I prefer triangle color wheel. For example, for this whole mid line is actually always having 50% value brightness, no matter which saturation you use. So basically we have this skin color and you want to add in more red, you can just shift the hue while keeping the same point on the color wheel, and it will still use the same value. If you want more saturated color, you can just shift it on the same horizon and it will still on the same value too. Just try to see this triangle color wheel on grayscale and you can see the grayscale value is always the same compared to the normal square color wheel. And then I add a bit red around the cheeks, on the nose and the ears. Those are small color variations that help the skin feel more alive because there are a lot of red and orange on the skin mostly because there is blood flow on it. That's like the common rule to color a face and skin overall. And maybe because it gives some kind of makeup to the face, I don't know. It just looks good. You always try to make things looks good anyway. So add those orange and red, or you can try to add it later using other layers mode. That's way safer than this. After that, I keep pushing the darker shadows whenever they need a little more depth, like around the corner, on the neck, and below the hair, and typical shadow stuff. At this stage, I try to keep the color palette fairly limited. And later on, I can always use overlay, soft light, or other blending modes to add in more color variations. So we don't want to make it messy and hard to read on this early stage. Just keep it simple, less color, more focus on the shapes. And also most people gonna think cleaner is always looks more professional anyway. So right now, I'm mostly focusing on building the forms and not making everything colorful directly because that's the easy part. The hard part is always the shape itself. The hair is pretty much the same process. I usually pick a slightly blue or gray color for the highlights on the opposite side on the shadow part. For this one it's on the right side. And then paint this darker curved line around the highlight itself. So it's like making it sandwich highlight. Honestly, I don't really have a technical reason for it. It just looks good and I really like it. And as for the blue, probably because I always use warm light for the main light. For the secondary side, I use a cooler one. It's like blue or pink also works. Green sometimes, depends on the hair color. Afterward, I use the tone curve again for the hair layer. This time I decided to push it slightly more toward blue and reduce some of the brown. So I just changed the channel into blue and changed some stuff in it. I did similar thing for the clothes too, except I shift them to more red color. Just try to experiment with it and see which looks good. Because you can easily just Ctrl Z it to undo and redoing stuff again. From here, I just keep rendering on normal layers. Unlike my previous videos, I don't immediately start stacking a bunch of blending modes. Just follow the process that you like, either it's manual coloring like this one, or using bunch of layers effects thing directly. To smooth everything out, I color pick constantly. For example, when I add some red to the cheeks, I don't just paint it and leave it. I likely add the red color and then I sample the surrounding colors and try to mix it and paint it on over the top it and sample it again and just keep repeating that process until everything blends together naturally. Remember to not overblend everything. Leaving visible brush strokes is always a good artistic choice for me. This is why I prefer to use color pick and just brush it manually than using blend brushes. Next, I use this textured brush to add some subtle pore-like texture on the skin. It helps break those perfectly smooth surfaces because I don't want to make things look like too smooth like plastic. It's a style choice mostly since I always make everything so messy, so gotta make it looks like intentional and more balanced. So I usually only keep small part that looks smooth like for the hair. But for the skin, it always use this rough textured one. For the eyes, I still use the same approach as always. I build up the shading with lots of small lines instead of blending everything together. I switch to this rough ink brush for the eyelashes and I just giving it random lines following the eyelash for it to build up things. And also use the same thing for shading the iris with a bunch of random strokes. So for these eyes, it's basically like a Pokemon balls. So the top part is darker because it's actually the shadow from the eyelashes. And the lower part is always brighter because it got the light. Although you can start using airbrush for around the white area and the eyes and then add the rough line afterward. It will make everything more interesting. So it's like soft blurry but sharp at the same time on the important spots. Those random lines help make it look detailed, especially on zoom out view. So it's already like my main style for making the eyes. As for the hands, honestly, we can just pretend they don't exist for this piece because they are really low effort. And now it's finally time for using multiply layer. This is pretty much the same workflow I used on previous video. I use it to darken the whole image. So it kinda give me enough room for purple lighting. And then I erase the areas where the light is hitting. So we don't want to make it way too dark from the start. And it may look a bit bad for a while, but this will totally help you to use overlay layer later because it gives you more room for purple lighting and you can just remove the shadows with it. The first thing you need to focus is on blocking the shape first, focusing on the big shadow shape. And then we can start using soft brush afterward to add the shadows and erase it. Sometimes I also paint a bit of bone slack with on this one, like on this other side. The shadow part is always the most complicated part with like mostly, because direct lighting is really easy, it's just one bright color, while the shadows are always gonna have tone like the light bones, the scatter light, the rim light, it's all on the shadow part. That's what make it harder. So there is no such thing as simple shadow unless you really just make it one like source isolated only. This layer is also where I add lot of smaller details, mostly like more depth to it, like around the corner of the mouth, around the eyes, like below eyelashes and the nostrils and the eye bags. There are subtle changes, but they add surprisingly big amount of depth to it, giving them more shapes and more 3D and less flat, especially if you want to use this semi-realistic feeling. A lot of this is honestly just trial and error. Sometimes I will try adding a slightly blue shadow and compare it to the previous version, while the previous is usually using this gray, yellow, orange color. If it looks better, I will keep it. If not, I will just paint over it. So don't be afraid to experiment with the colors. And then friendly reminder that Liquify works across multiple layers. So instead of repainting everything to fix up the shapes, I can just liquify the entire layer group to fix the overall shapes. This change here is pretty subtle, mostly reducing the volume on the hair, but it's much faster than redoing everything. And for the next part, I also forgot to record the overlay and soft light layers. But they are basically the same as my previous Krita video, so go watch them instead. They are mostly there to bring back some warm orange lighting that may be lost from the multiplayer layer. Although I might have gone a bit little overboard with this because the soft light layer almost completely wipes out the shadows I made. So we're gonna re-add those shadow later. And finally, the hard light layer. I start by using this textured brush to paint the main highlights. I mostly follow the shading that's already there and use the highlights to push the form a little further. Using this textured brush on the hard light layer is always a good way to add details cause it won't replace the existing shading. If we use normal layers for adding texture, we're gonna end up redoing stuff like because we paint over it on the top. But with this layer blending, it always blend in. Like we can add colors and shading without ruining what we had before, without ruining the shapes and the shading and the color variation. It will stacking, like blending in. I also repaint the eyes at this stage. I use the same random strokes as before and then sharpen everything with this ink brush because eyes are always the focus on portrait painting. So we gotta make it cleaner than the others. For some reason, adding those sharper lines always make the drawing feels much more detailed. Then I move on to the hair. Still using the hard light layer, my hair rendering is basically just a bunch of random strokes too. I always like this messy looking hair, so that's the style I naturally end up with. Just keeping it really loose and flowy, a bit windy and randoms. But these random lines still following the hair flow, like so it's not entirely random, I guess. Meanwhile, we still ignoring the hands. And then still on the highlight layer, I also add a lot more highlights on the shaded area. I just like giving the skin that slightly shiny looks. usually around the cheekbone and the tip of the nose and around inner side of the eyes. It's kinda always makes more interesting for me. After that, I switch back to normal layer and paint over everything that still looks messy from the sketch leftover. Honestly, I have no idea how to explain this part. I just keep painting till it looks right. So I see part that kinda distracting. I just paint over it, removing some of previous details if it's too much, and then focusing on building the edge, like separating some part of it. I also remove the shading leftover from the sketch like that around the jaw and the nose. The idea here is working with what we already have. Since a lot of we did with the layers like that are like layers, it already do a lot. So there are ton of details here, and we actually can say it's finished, but we gotta polish it. So I'm mostly just color picking and removing unnecessary details. The hair gets same treatment, more random strokes, more clean up, and more adjustment till I'm happy with it. Eventually, I merge everything together so I can erase parts of the hair more easily and clean up the silhouette without switching to the first layer again. Those contrast between orange and blue give a lot of artistic feelings. That's like the basic color theory thing from using orange and blue properly. The very last step is adding another highlight for more lighting. I usually do this last part with large airbrush. So this mostly for the overall feeling of it, like final adjustment, make it more bright and warm and fresh. Personally, I prefer this over a layer because it gives me a bit more control. But feel free to mix things up and see what's best for you. At this point, I'm not adding details anymore. So I'm mostly just fixing things up and adjusting overall color and the lighting using this big airbrush. As for the background, honestly, I have no idea what to do with it. I think a plain white background works just fine. Yeah, but I don't know why I add this random background. And yes, please ignore the hands. And then for this shading, I always recommend you to start with using harder brush. This way, you don't need to use drastic change in color to get it more visible. Because with harder brush, you can see the separation clearly than using soft brush. So don't blend in things directly.